Hey everyone, happy afternoon and welcome to TechBeat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. My name is Earl Foote. I am founder CEO of Nexus IT. Nexus IT is a white glove outsourced cybersecurity and IT services firm based here in northern Utah and servicing a nationwide footprint. I appreciate you all joining us here today. I'm excited to have our esteemed guest on TechBeat today, Trina Limpert. I will introduce Trina here in just a moment, but before we get there, just a couple of quick announcements and housekeeping items. First of all, thank you to Silicon Slopes and the Silicon Slopes crew for letting us use their studio here. We've got Connor and Dave in studio, along with Mallory Lovestad, our director of marketing. Um, TechBeat is available now on all major podcast platforms, so you can stream it in audio or video format wherever you're at. We would appreciate your subscription. Lots of amazing content, good ideas on how to grow business, how to be a better leader, sales and marketing, how to take care of your team, create the right client experiences, all that kind of stuff from really amazing leaders that join me every couple of weeks here on TechBeat. So I encourage you to go subscribe and consume, that content. We will be taking some question and answers, at least at the end or throughout the hour as they're applicable. So whatever platform you're joining us from, feel free to go ahead and plug those questions or comments into those platforms. I do want to quickly also mention some of the upcoming segments we have. Let's see here. On March 7th, I'll be joined by Tim Cooley. Tim is a management consultant at Point B. He's also the author of the Pitch Deck book. Most recently, he was the executive director of Park City Angels, a guy very well versed on fundraising within organizations. I'm looking forward to having him on and chatting more about that process of fundraising. My friends Dustin Kenyon and Rob Pilecki, who are co-founders over at Washi, will be with me on March 28th. Romaine Marshall, one of the nation's foremost cyber and privacy attorneys, will be with me in April, along with Jason Klug. He is the founder CEO of Klugonics, later in April. Jeff Erickson, if you're here in Utah, everybody knows who Jeff Erickson is. If you're not, get to know Jeff Erickson. He's probably the most genuine, sincere guy in Utah that does so much good in the entrepreneurial and startup ecosystems. He's with me on May 11th. Monty Deer, the CEO of Kizik, a really cool consumer brand, shoe brand here from Utah, on June 8th. We also have Johnny Hanna coming up, Derek Miner and Greg Trimble, who are founders and partners in Lemonade Stand, digital marketing agency, actually our digital marketing agency at Nexus IT. Really great guys. Andrea Guthrie as well, who is Chief Strategy Officer at Kiln and on the board at Pando with myself. Actually, she's the chairperson of the board at Pando. Make sure you keep an eye out for all those upcoming segments and join us for those live. And then check them out on your favorite podcast platforms for re-listens. All right, let's get to the lady of the hour, my fantastic friend and esteemed guest, Trina Limpert. Trina Celeste is the CEO of RizeNext Corp, a leadership and culture consultancy agency focused on creating diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforces. Trina is the co-founder of TechMoms.org, recognized in 2020 as Nonprofit of the Year by the Salt Lake Chamber, helping transition hundreds of women into technical careers, recognized as 30 Women to Watch by Utah Business Magazine. She dedicates her time to writing, speaking, advocating, and serving on higher education boards at Weber State and UVU.
Yeah. Thank
Trina,
you.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. This is fun to be back.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. I know, you joined me a couple years ago here on TechBeat. Hopefully the podcast has evolved and improved in that time period,
Yeah,
but
it's nice to be in person. That's number one. Be able to do this live. It's great.
Yeah, I think we did this early, maybe 2020 or, maybe mid
Yeah, I
2020,
think
and it was
so.
virtual. Yeah. So it's great to be in person here in studio.
Yeah.
Trina, you and I have been friends for a number of years. Actually,
Mhm.
we were originally on a virtual podcast together, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and then
Yep.
started hanging out at local events and stuff like that. I've always enjoyed our interactions. I've always been super impressed by the person you are, by the way you show up, by the way you lead, by the work you do in the community. And
Thank you.
so let's talk a little bit about Trina Limpert, the gal. Where did you come from? Where did you grow up? What brought you to, where you are now in your life and your journey?
Yeah, the whole backstory is here in Utah. I am a Utah girl, born and raised mountain girl. So I moved around a lot. So I was born in Salt Lake City in the LDS hospital, 1973, October 31st. So I am a Halloween baby. But I've always lived in Utah, but I moved 10 times up until I was 15. And so I had this very shifting, moving. I guess I learned to deal with ambiguity very early on. Learned to develop friendships really easily because that's what you had to do every 2 years. And but I always had this aspect of being outdoors, and we had little rural farms, I guess. We had goats and chicken and cows and turkeys, and my dad had been raised on a farm, so I think he always wanted to have that in our family, even though he ran a welding shop. And so I grew up kind of in his welding shops, helping him, do random little tasks, and then on this farm with all our goats and whatnot, and running around the hills. I lived in Logan for a few, you know, up in Smithfield and Paradise and in Cache Valley. Was kind of like my youngest years in elementary school, and
So beautiful up there.
oh, it's beautiful, and
Yeah.
I'd spend my days just kind of out building huts and running the mountains, and I don't think my mom knew where we were most of the time. We just ran the hills.
Yeah. Perfect
And
childhood.
yeah, it was. It
Yeah.
really was, even though it was a little bit crazy. I was the seventh of 10 kids. And so I just thought that was normal. Like, I didn't realize until I was probably in my 30s that, like, you know what, 10 kids probably isn't that normal. And moving that much, probably not that normal, but, loving family and just a lot of great experiences with goats and having fun.
I don't imagine you were doing yoga with goats back then.
No goat yoga. In fact, I spoke last year at the SHRM conference, and I was joking about like balance is bullshit, and I'm like, oh no, it's goat shit. So I don't know if we need to cut that out, but
No, we're
it's
good.
like
We're good.
it's because you can't balance everything, right? And so I'd made this play on the goat yoga, trying to balance the goats. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I had this really adventurous upbringing, I guess, and then, as I got into high school, I really had always appreciated my dad, engineering and architecture. I got very involved in drafting in high school and actually started out at UVU in architectural engineering, and that's what I thought I was going to do. I was going to become an architect. Really?
Yeah.
You're going to
Yeah.
go into architecture?
I was going to, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk
So,
about that later. But
yeah,
yeah.
I love homes. I love design. I joke, when I speak, I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I joke about my Barbies and my goats a lot. But growing up, my Barbies would get really bored playing in the playhouse. They'd be like, "Hey, you can only put on so many outfits and design your house so many times before you get really bored." But my parents had bought me like these electrical, like erector sets, and so I could build motorized cars for my Barbies. And so my Barbies, I couldn't afford the pink Corvette, right? We
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of money growing up, so I would build these erector motorized. It was probably like the first ATVs that were ever existed, back in the day. But my Barbies got to ride around a lot, and they had a lot more fun, I think, than other girls' Barbies did. So, I always had a love for design and engineering, and both of those things, and I think that's kind of led to a lot of what I do now. Is like you can have both. You can be you know, love fashion and design and all these things, and have an engineering um affinity and want to be in that area, and your family. Like, it's a life of ands instead of ors. I,
Yeah.
I feel like we put ourselves in boxes a lot, and
Yeah.
it's like you do this or you do this, and I've kind of like learned to intersect a lot of these loves I have.
Yeah, that's
So
fantastic. I,
yeah.
I I agree with that 100%. Sometimes I have too many ands,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I'm with you.
the older I get, it's
Focus.
like, let me cut off a
Okay.
few of those ands,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Learning to
Okay.
focus is definitely a challenge for me.
Yeah, I've had so many hobbies, but so let's talk about, okay, so growing up in rural Utah,
Mhm.
big family, lots of moves, goats, right?
Yeah, lots of goats.
How do you go from that into technology, into being a leader, into working for some really cool
Yeah.
companies and having some really significant positions within some of those
Oh,
companies?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I also talk about, because I get asked that question a lot, like, how did you get into engineering? How did you make that step, from, mountain farm girl to, where I'm at today? And I always joke, it's like I wrecked my car into a parked car when I was 18, and I lost my driver's license because I also had a number of other infractions. We don't need to go there. But I had
You were a hellion, Trina.
I was a hellion.
Yay.
I admit it.
Mm.
We don't need to go into much more detail than that.
Uh,
But, I found myself riding my little brother's bike to a fast food restaurant called Vittles, and it was while I was sliding around on these greasy floors, and I'm, like, arguing with the other, employees of, like, whose burger order is whose, and I was like, "I can't do this. I cannot live this life," right? Like, how do I go to what I know I wanna do? And I have this vision for what I wanna do in my life, but I couldn't get there. Like I said, we didn't have financial means to get me into college. There wasn't the dollars there to do it. There was times in my upbringing where we were on welfare, and it just wasn't an option.
yeah.
And so I saved up my Vittles dollars, and I got into my first semester at UVU, and started out in architectural engineering. So I took structural engineering and electrical engineering. I just loved those aspects, but one of the courses they had us take was a Pascal programming class. And I went, "Oh, wow, this computer science thing might be a real thing." I mean, this is 1994-ish, 93. And so, I switched. I also knew I wanted to make a lot of money. Like, that was a thing for me. I didn't wanna grow up the way I'd grown up. It was
Hmm.
a motivator for me. And I was like, "I think that I can get through school a lot faster and not have to go the whole 8 years to become an architect," and I didn't see that didn't feel like my future. This computer science thing felt really great to me. So I got a job at Hill Air Force Base working graveyards. I moved up to Weber, got into their computer science program at Weber State, and just started digging in. And I never looked back. I never questioned that decision. It's just been like, this is where I'm going from the very beginning. There was no other option for me. And so I did my computer science degree, got hired at Novell as an engineer, a network engineer, and did a bachelor's in business and information systems. And then, continued my career as a business analyst and designed and built systems for years. I worked at Oracle in technical sales for a period of time. Did my master's degree at the University of Utah. Did their executive MBA program, which was amazing. And then continued and got a job at eBay. Did their implementation for account management systems. Then ran their product organization. Then I ran tech ops, ran DevOps, ran their technical project management, PMO offices. Just had all of these various leadership opportunities. And kind of the end of my corporate career was just a year and a half ago as senior director of CX consulting at Oracle, and oversaw large scale strategic implementations for Berkshire Hathaway's or Charter Communications, kind of
Hmm.
large scale implementations of Oracle products. And as that was happening, I was, I think everybody in Utah seems to have a hustle on the side, right? I had
Yeah.
my hustle has always been seeing more women in technology, and so had been working on this Tech Moms program that's just launched, and it was growing so fast that I decided to put a time out in my corporate career and launch Tech Moms, and also my core consulting business, keeping that going. So I stepped away from Oracle and said, "Okay, I'm gonna focus, not do
Yeah.
the
Not
20
too many
things,
hands.
not
Yeah.
too many, but still, So RizeNext, started doing a lot of culture and leadership training and working in strategy,
Yeah.
and then launched Tech Moms, which has been just an amazing journey.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So let's take just a quick step back. I do want to talk a lot about what you're doing with Tech Moms, because such a fantastic effort, and the things that you and your team are doing in the community are quite impressive. But Where along the journey? I know, in eBay, you end up in a leadership position in DE&I.
Yeah.
And I know DE&I has been, something near and dear to your heart.
Yeah.
Where in that journey did that come into, your career as a leader?
Yeah.
Was it at eBay? Was it prior? And then, of course, you've really leaned into that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was a moment where, I speak a lot on finding your purpose. And there was a moment, I don't know how long ago it was, honestly, but probably around 2016 or so. I'd always been very involved and really wanted to see more women in technology from the very beginning. I actually wrote my thesis paper on why women should go into computer science when I did my computer science degree. So that was 1996.
And you were in classes of like one
Yeah,
woman
I was
in
the
computer
only
science.
woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I won't go down a whole other track of things you have to deal with as a woman in tech.
Sure.
But I just saw the opportunities for women, and I just went, why are there not more women in coming in and taking these opportunities? It just boggled my mind. I mean, even clear back then. But as I went through my career, I always got really involved in community programs and steering committees and you know, got involved in a lot of these initiatives over the years. Eventually becoming the global president of women in IT at eBay and overseeing, large scale implementations across 17 countries, and we had 1,500 members. And as I was running those initiatives, the one common theme I always saw was that we were just doing stuff, but we weren't really trying to say, here's the impact we can make, right? Which really frustrated me. But one of the programs I launched, which kind of spearheaded my work in moving forward with Tech Moms, was a program that was designed for teaching employees' daughters how to code. And so that program, we launched it at 6 of our sites, had great engagement, both male and female, because what happened and what I realized was that people started connecting, you know what? This is gonna be my daughter that's gonna have to deal with these issues, right?
Yeah.
This is gonna be my sister, it's gonna be my niece, and I started getting really high engagement across all of our organization, not just with the women that, were living, some of the challenges. And so one of the things that, as I started to engage and get feedback on the program is they asked me, "Well, what about my wife? How does my wife get into this? I think she'd be really great at this. How do I help her transition?" And so that's kind of where the idea for me came from.
Mm-hmm.
And so after I left eBay and started working, you know, putting the word out within our amazing community that we have here in Utah. I mean, we could not do any of this work without the engagement that we have here.
Sure.
It's been pretty amazing. And I started putting the word out of, hey, I'd like to launch this, women coding program, and started just soliciting and got connected to Mikkel Blake, who's one of my co-founders, who had
Yeah.
gone through a similar program out of Silicon Valley. And she was still living in San Francisco. I actually flew out to eBay and met her at her apartment to talk about this clear back early 2019.
Cool. Yeah.
And so we got connected, like minds, like passions. And then my third co-founder, Robin, came in the picture to Silicon Slopes. Actually, we
Yeah.
met at Silicon Slopes and in the
Interesting.
hallway. And I said, "Here's what I'm doing." She's like, "I want to be part of it." And she was just making a shift from no longer working with Dr. Madsen at the Utah Women in Leadership Project. And it was like, we call ourselves the Three Musketeers. It's like the three-legged stool that had to come together. Like each of us brings very unique skill sets and talents and role to the work that we're doing, that if one of this was missing, it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So I feel very fortunate the universe kind of like said, "Yep, here you go." Right?
The right
Let's do
founding
this.
team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
That's so cool. So let's talk a little bit more about Tech Moms. Let's talk about the mission. Let's talk about the
Sure.
work. Let's talk about some of the milestones, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we founded early 2020 with this idea. We were going to run a pilot, right? And we ended up doing two. We had 27 women go through that first pilot, and some of those women now have started dev shops. Deliara Santos completed a full stack dev program at V School and then started a dev shop under Tech Moms, and it's now a for-profit business that's up and running and supporting small businesses throughout Utah.
Isn't that so cool?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so we've just seen this high success rate of women transitioners. And I think the key for us is recognizing that it's not skill sets. Any higher education institution could do this if it was just teach coding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of barriers that exist for women that are just another level of support that are needed, whether it's childcare, financial need, and then the network and community support. You think about somebody that's maybe returning to work, they don't have an existing network to pull from to get hired or know how to job search or how to do their LinkedIn profile or a lot of these things. 40% I would say are about our return to work, and the rest are career transitioners that are existing highly skilled long-term careers, but they just want to shift into tech roles.
Yeah.
And so we've got this great mix of being able to support anyone regardless of where they're coming from. The only requirement we have, you don't even have to be a woman or a mom, is a high school diploma.
Okay.
But we have all the way from high school to diploma to doctorates that come into our program. It's
It's pretty
very,
cool.
very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Majority have bachelor's degrees that are coming through. So a very highly educated
Mm-hmm.
workforce that's ready to go. And it's just the level of support to say, here's how you do it, here's what it is, here's your next steps. We're here to support you no matter what. We say once a tech mom, always a tech mom, right?
Yeah.
And you're just part of this community, and sometimes joke it's like a cult, but it's a good cult, you know. It's like once you're in, you want to be always in, and
Yeah.
and they support each other, and it's become an incredible community.
Yeah. I've seen how tight knit it is. Of course, having the privilege of attending, a few events,
Hmm.
sponsoring some things with you all, and supporting a bit. It's really quite impressive, right?
Yeah.
And it's particularly, I think it's been very inspiring to see, moms who have stepped away from careers. You mentioned that's about 40%, right? But
Hmm.
moms who have stepped away from careers to raise family,
Hmm.
for 10 years, 15, 20 years, and then, are ready to come back,
Yeah.
and start up another career. But they're like, well, tech's, of course, that's a burgeoning space that is
Yeah.
going to
How do I do
continue
it?
to be
Yeah.
forever, right? And so how do I get there? And the fact that you're solving a very significant problem, in many ways, right? One, helping women transition and create on ramps into a very promising career path, right?
Hmm.
Two, in tech, we always struggle for quantities of talent, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
always shortages of talent in tech, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned it, but typically a very male-dominated sort of industry
Hmm.
that, which, by the way, and you and I know this, scientifically, more diverse teams perform better, right?
Yep.
Your business outcomes are better the more diverse your team is.
Correct.
Um, the more perspective you have, the more diversity of ideas and all that kind of stuff. And so, as founders, as technologists, as entrepreneurs in tech, and leaders in tech, we need more pipeline of more diverse talent.
Yeah.
And so, you're solving some really great problems that,
Yeah.
it's cool, but it's also inspiring. I've
Yeah.
seen how, I've attended a graduation, right, and how emotional that is, for
It is.
these
Yeah.
gals who, are either shifting careers or transitioning back into a career space. It's
Yeah.
really quite
Yeah.
extraordinary.
They're probably one of the most they're my favorite days. They're the most motivating days to just see the transformation that can happen in 2 months, right? As we bridge. Just going back on what you were saying about trying to find talent, that was another reason why I started Tech Moms is as a technology leader, I was the same as everybody else. It's like, how do I find talent? And we had initiatives for, let's hire diversity, let's get there. And one of the common responses was always, well, women just don't go into tech. Like I can't tell you how many times I heard that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I am so frustrated. Fine, I'll go create it. Like it was just it motivated me to say, let's stop making excuses
Hmm.
and go create what we're saying is missing. Why is that? Why can't you find it? What is happening in our society where there's a whole group that's been excluded? And you have this very highly educated, underutilized resource just sitting and waiting to be tapped, and nobody was doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And they're ready to go. So that's just kind of one of those other moments for me. It came out of a moment of frustration of no more excuses. Let's go figure this out. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So tell us a little bit about, you've now had, is it 381 graduates?
73 women in classes right now across the Wasatch Front. We partner with our higher education partners like Weber State and UVU, Mountain Land Tech, and Salt Lake Community College. We're also running an online program that runs nationally. So we've got, a large group that's coming up this next month. So by the end of March, we'll have close to 400 women having gone through the program in 2.5 years.
That's
Yeah.
really impressive.
Yeah.
400 families that have different trajectories. Some of
Yeah.
those, I know some of those families, have been low income families. Now
Yeah.
they've got two salaries at home.
Hmm.
Tech, tends to be a good paying sort of career path, right?
Yeah.
And so, changing the future and trajectory of of some families as well.
Yeah.
Really just super cool and commendable. What you and Mikkel and Robin are all up to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that is one aspect that I sometimes gets overlooked is the economic and social impact that these organizations, this work does. So it's really looking at not only the women, but I think we've had 969 women go apply to come into the program. If we were to able to serve all of those, it's over 2,000 kids supported, right? And you think about the economic impacts and the social impacts that are enabled by having more income in the home, more ability to enable all of those children in our society. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so cool.
big
These.
picture.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, Sid Tetro was on, here on TechBeat with me a few months back,
Hmm.
and the work that she's done with the Women's Tech, Tech Council, and then She Tech, this all just kind of dovetails together.
Yeah,
Takes a village,
it does.
to make shifts, right? But all these on ramps that you're all creating for, women in STEM, right? Women to have different options available to them, and of course, to open for industry,
Yeah,
open perspectives, open minds, and
yeah.
help industry evolve. It's been super awesome.
It has
Yeah.
been. I love it. I
All right.
love it.
So I want to transition a little bit and talk about what you're up to at Rise Next. Um, uh, Real quick, I'm going to check with the studio. Is video okay on your end? Are we struggling on video? Okay. I'm sorry if you're joining us live and video is choppy and grainy. I'm not exactly sure what's going on.
I broke the camera.
No, it's me. I promise it's me. It's not you. So hold tight with us. We're working on it. But hopefully audio, you can all hear audio just fine. Okay. All right. Stay tuned with us on audio here. We're working on the video to see what we can do with it. Okay. Um, Trina, let's talk a little bit about Rise Next. Let's talk
Yeah.
about, um, you know, uh, this career path of yours in leadership,
Hmm.
and how that's led to you creating, a consultancy agency and what you're doing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, is I had my day job, and then I always have had two jobs. I think it's just that's how I work. So the my core leadership and the work that I was doing there, and then as I eventually became the global president of Women in IT, and then doing diversity strategy for all of our organization before I left there, I started to get calls for people to come. Hey, can you come consult us on how to do strategy? And so one of the things that from a life, I'm going to go back to my life story a little bit. In 2019, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so went through a
Difficult.
bilateral mastectomy, did the whole thing. I am clear. I actually did again, another follow-up this morning that said you're clear again. So
Good.
I'm happy. It's been 4 years now. So thank you.
Yeah.
But part of that process for me and going through cancer, and it makes you look at yourself a lot differently. You face your mortality and you're like, what am I doing in my life? Right. And I think it was a real opportunity for me to step back and going, what type of impact do I want to make? and where do I really want to spend my time. I think, it's always a benefit to anybody that can step back and say, okay, at the end of my life, what do I want people to say about me? And what does that look like? And so for me, that allowed me to kind of make some big decisions. I mean, leaving those golden handcuffs that Oracle had, I was making a lot of money.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
was doing well. No complaints financially, right?
Yeah.
And I'd always been really good at investing, and I became an angel investor. I was, I've done well that way, and it enabled me to make some great decisions to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to invest in myself now. Um, and one of those things is starting to use the leadership training that I'd learned, the aspects of diversity, implementation, and strategy. And one of those was I had always wanted to go to Harvard. It was on my bucket list to do that. And so I uh, went back to Harvard. I did corporate strategy at Harvard and really started to focus on how can we create really strong models for implementing as a business uh, lever, right? Not just something nice to do anymore. It does have those business impacts, 30% higher, 36% higher growth and profitability, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And so I put together these models for driving diversity strategy and have been implementing those and helping companies understand what it takes to go from awareness all the way to action. Because the other thing I've seen, I'm like, there was $8 billion spent, I think, in 2020 on diversity, equity, and inclusion training with not showing the impact,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not to say it wasn't good,
Sure.
but without a strategy or a real way to implement and create change and track it and measure it and say, hey, what's the next thing, the next thing, next thing, it just gets lost.
Yeah. Awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, started putting together this model, been implementing it for the last few years, and then doing a lot of leadership development because I think one of the key missing parts that I see is this what I call the frozen middle. Usually we'll go in, I work with executive teams or I've got really passionate employees and individual contributors that saying, hey, how do we get this going? How do I, create awareness of the work that could be done and how do we enable it? But the middle management teams, I think, are so overwhelmed right now with everything that's going on in society as a whole. It can become like, okay, we've got mental wellness now and we have all of these different things that I've got to learn how to manage and work through.
Yeah.
And I think they get really overwhelmed and they just kind of step back
The
from it.
information age has spawned the evolution of the workplace, at a pace that,
Yeah.
so I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years, even just the last 5 years, the pace has been significantly accelerated,
Yeah.
access to ideas and we're going to talk a little bit, about modern workplace, right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
is
we are.
what is empathetic, leadership versus pathetic leadership?
I'm sure we've all seen both,
Yeah.
right? We all have examples in our head of both those in our lives. So I think really just working more with the leadership teams and leadership development initiatives has where I've seen we're making a lot broader change because that's where all your hiring and promotion and engagement is happening. And that's where you really can create really positive cultures of belonging is that importance of the middle management and unfreezing that and having them step into it instead of stepping back from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly, of course, right now, economic downturn, a
Mhm.
lot of layoffs, as you mentioned. Middle management is oftentimes, very busy at the moment,
Yeah.
understaffed.
Mhm.
So it's, the interesting times to be
Yeah.
navigating, challenging times to navigate.
Absolutely.
I do want to step back real quick and just acknowledge,
Mhm.
we are so grateful that you're with us, that you're a cancer survivor.
Thank you.
We're so grateful that you're still here to have a significant impact in the community. Utah is a better place because Trina Limpert is here, because
That's
you lean
kind.
into it,
Thank you.
because you lead, because you engage with the community, because you get out and you connect with people and you love people. And if you weren't here, first of all, we wouldn't be friends, because we met post cancer,
Yes,
right?
we did. Yeah.
And second of all, you have brought a different dialogue, to Utah that has been very constructive and helpful, right? And I know
Thank you.
beyond Utah as well. It's interesting, I had my own little, and we won't go into the details, but my own little brush with death,
Yeah.
about 5.5 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how transitioning into middle age and then, of course, brush with death kind of makes you refocus, right? And,
It
and,
does.
and start thinking about legacy and impact and
Yeah.
where you really want to go with your life and the things you want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is 100% apparent, that you're a woman with a mission, right? With
Mm-hmm.
purpose, and that you're building to help, create a better community around you. It's great. It's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like to think of it like the way I describe it sometimes is a heat map. So if I were to get to the end of my life and look back, what does the heat map of my life look like? And does it the way I would look at it is if I have angered or upset people, do I have a lot of red on my heat map? If I've just like ignored and just said, well, it's not my problem, it's kind of a yellow. And or do I have what I like to call the bright blue Trina blue, which is like I've made an impact and transformed or changed somebody's life, and I just want to see a whole heat map of blue. That's the way I visualize it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is my life is this heat map.
Yeah. Well, you're winning at it. I can tell you that. It's fantastic. So, with RizeNext, and you're engaging with leadership teams, with executive
Hmm.
teams. Obviously, you having a significant pedigree, and by the way, just I mean, kudos, coming from rural Utah, right? Building your own little erector set, vehicles for your Barbies and stuff, right? And having a master's degree, having gone to Harvard, having had a significant quantity of prestigious leadership roles, right?
Hmm.
Learned a massive amount about leadership, about how to build businesses, about how to be
Yeah.
an effective, empathetic leader, right?
Yeah.
And now, you're transitioning that into help other organizations and other leaders win, help them um, build better teams with more healthy dynamics,
Yes.
more constructive environments where people can do better work.
Yeah.
Um, it's super cool,
Yeah.
it's really inspiring. Um, so let's talk about empathetic leadership versus pathetic leadership, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about about what this is all about, and let's start digging into maybe some examples and some more
Yeah.
dialogue
Yeah.
around it. Yeah.
So, I had fun with that because we don't really call people out and calling them pathetic, right? But it's fun to we do want to be empathetic, and what does that mean, and how can I exhibit it? We both serve on the Salt Lake Board of Chambers, and we were at a board meeting once, and we were having a conversation kind of around this, and someone next to me said, "Well, I'm just so tired of people saying we need to talk about our feelings at work." And I think there's a mindset shift that needs to happen because guess what? We're emotional people. We're emotional beings, right? When something happens, it comes in our limbic system as an emotion first, and then we have logic. So we're emotional beings first,
Yeah.
and then we think logically.
Right.
And so being aware of like, you know what, emotion is part of being human. And as a leader, you're leading people. Therefore, you're going to need to not talk about our feelings,
Yeah.
but, talk about recognizing and being aware of emotion in the workplace and how to navigate that. And if we keep pulling away from it, we're just never going to develop as great leaders and be able to develop great teams and have high performing teams without that awareness. And so a lot of times everybody's heard the get comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that discomfort that nobody wants. They're like, "Okay, yeah, I can be a great leader. I can lean into discomfort unless it's around this emotional thing. It's
Hmm.
just too uncomfortable for me." But
Yeah.
guess what? You're going to need to. And so I think those that have really leaned in and said, "Okay, let me develop my emotional quotient or EQ." Right. One of um, the key things is I've been doing a lot of this work is emotional intelligence and your is something that is just a set number. It's like my ability to learn, right? My IQ. That's just set. I
Yep.
can learn at a certain pace. That's just my IQ. I can't really change that. I can develop skills, but your emotional quotient is something that can be developed. And I don't think that a lot of individuals understand this is something I can work on. This is something I can develop. I can build strategies to be able to help me become more emotionally intelligent and aware of my emotions and aware of the emotions around me
Hmm.
and how to react to them. And so we've been doing a lot of work in how this plays into cultural appreciation is what I would call it. It's being able to be aware of someone else's life experience or how they might be reacting with a level of curiosity rather than emotion, right?
Yeah.
And as a leader, can you do that and do that well? And learning how to move through that process of emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Really, this is such a, um, I think, such an important topic today. As I mentioned, the workplace has evolved so quickly, and
mhm,
um, you know, uh, professionals' awareness of themselves, their self-awareness, right,
mhm.
and their awareness of what their experience should be like in a healthy workplace has evolved at a very
Oh yeah.
rapid pace, right? And candidly, for me, and I think you mentioned it, but if you're a leader who is not leaning into the fact that the human race has evolved when it comes to how we engage in the workplace,
Mhm.
at least in the Western world, right?
Yeah.
You know, the old structures of command and control and, cracking the whip and that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
it doesn't work
Mm-mm.
anymore. It
Mm-mm.
does not produce results, right?
Right.
What produces results is creating an environment where people, um, they feel, and I literally just came from a podcast. I'll talk a little bit more about, some of the things we're up to, but a podcast on psychological safety, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Creating cultures and environments where people can feel psychologically safe, where they
Right.
feel like that they can express themselves, that they can challenge ideas, that they can bring up new ideas, that they feel that they're in an environment where they are empowered and enabled to thrive
Mhm.
and to be in flow.
Mhm.
That creates high performing organizations, right?
Yes.
Um, Leaders who in today's world want to revert to archaic ideas of what leadership, is, they bottleneck
Oh yeah.
organizations. And so, as we've seen, this change and this trend, and as a high growth tech enabled services organization
Yeah.
who's not only growing, at a significant pace organically, but also doing M&A activity, doing acquisitions. We've 100% seen the need to engage at a higher level to figure out how to create the right vibe, right,
Right.
for our
Yeah.
team,
Yeah.
so that they feel healthy, so that
Yeah.
they feel that they can do their best work of their
Yeah.
career. So, on our executive team, we, in the past 8 or 9 months, we've brought on Dr. Jeb Hurley as our fractional head of cultural integration and leadership
Wonderful.
development.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who literally has a doctorate in the behavioral science behind high performing teams, has done
Yeah.
massive amounts of research, written books, written a SaaS platform around it all.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic mentor and friend to myself, right? And so he and I were literally just on a podcast just prior to this one, talking about these same concepts
Yeah.
of just how quickly that the workplace has evolved, and the
Yeah.
need for leaders to lean into
Yeah.
a modern
It's an
workplace.
expectation now,
Yeah.
right? Like attracting talent and retaining talent, this is a crucial piece of making sure your leadership teams understand their role in emotional intelligence and having empathy and some of these things that may have been very foreign
Yep. Yep.
for especially those that may have been in the tech industry for a number of years, right? A lot of promotions happened based on skill sets, based on understanding of certain technologies, and the people side of it maybe didn't develop at fast of a pace. And I saw it time and time again throughout my career of, even, and I know a lot of companies have been going through layoffs lately, and it spurred a reminder of a situation where we were going through layoffs and I had to lay off a few people, and another one of my fellow leaders walked in, and it was just couldn't even have the conversation, just so, like, shut down because that he was feeling, but he just could not have, like, say, "Hey, how are you doing?" could not connect with his team after, and he walked in, looked at everybody, turned around and walked out. Like, just could not make that next step.
Yeah.
And everybody went like, "Is he okay? Like,
Yeah.
what is going?" Like, he just could not get there. And I think being able to recognize our feelings and not shut them down when they're happening, learning to acknowledge them, that self-awareness piece of it, learning how to regulate and move through some of those things that are happening in the workplace. It's a really hard time for a lot of employees, that whether you're staying or going,
Yeah.
and learning how to move through those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also a time for empathy for leaders too,
Yes,
the
absolutely.
pace at which this is all evolving, right?
Yeah.
And the bar has been raised very high, right? On
Very fast.
what's
Yeah.
expected out of leaders, what professionals expect, the type of environments that they expect to work in, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, as a leader, we'd also
Yeah.
ask, assume positive
Yeah.
intent,
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
of all of us.
We're all trying. I
Yeah.
think we're all doing our best, and I think that level of acceptance within the workplace of, hey, we're all doing our best, but if I can just say, hey, this is making me really uncomfortable right now, I might need a few minutes, or just being able to say those things sometimes,
Yeah.
right? I think the other level of complexity that's come in, and this shows up in a lot of the strategies that I'm building, is remote working, because that's a whole other. Now you've got, not only am I like in the workplace, but I'm learning how do I make connection and build teams remotely with someone I never see, and
Yeah.
doing that virtually. That's another skill set that's having to be developed and learned. And how do I engage and drive teams in a distributed, decentralized way?
Yeah.
There's so many challenges out there. So yes, lots of empathy for our leaders
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to navigate all of these things at the same time.
Yeah, it is. There is no doubt that it is very challenging, right?
Hmm.
As a leader, at the same time, of course, it's challenging for professionals who are, in environments that don't empower them to do their best work, right?
Right.
So, let's let's talk a little bit more maybe about some of the traits that you think leaders should start to focus on, right? Some
Yeah.
of the things that they can do that begin to help them evolve their EQ, right?
Yeah.
Help them um, authentically be empathetic, right?
Yes.
Because there's a difference.
Oh, there is.
Yeah,
Yeah. The authenticity is a big piece, right? And part of authenticity is saying, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm trying. Like we're saying, I'm working on this. This is something I'm trying to develop in myself as well. So there's 4 areas for developing your EQ. Your self-awareness, I think, is the first one. If we just keep it at a high level, there's 4 areas. So self-awareness is understanding, like, if I react with anger, why is that? Stepping back and going, is it really that other person, or is it me? Bias often is developed in a place that can trigger anger. And so that was often how I experienced it, was yelling in a meeting, and I'd have to stop the meeting and say, whoa, 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 why are you so angry right now? Which they didn't often like, but I just would have to interrupt it, because it would get, and they couldn't answer the question. So sometimes just awareness of, I'm having a lot of emotion. Anger is an emotion. Why am I feeling this? Let me step back and take a few minutes. I call it the power of the pause, right? Like, how do we pause and say, oh, something's going on right here. Can I deal with it in this moment? Or do I need to ask for, like, a moment to figure out what's going on? Right.
yeah,
If you're continually feeling that, and how do you address it, and putting plans. So being aware of it, but then self-regulating is the next one. So how do I now regulate those emotions, and be able to put them into um, a pathway that then is actionable? So can I control my emotions in the moment? Can I regulate like how I react, and not just blah, right?
hmm hmm
So I think that's a form of, just those two are this inward self side. Then you have your social skills. And this is really where a lot of the diversity work can come in as well, is really, do you have social skills where you can work within any group, and within any community, and within any team, and within, right? Are you aware of different social connections, different life experiences? Are you comfortable in being in a different group that you're not familiar with? A lot of I would challenge probably majority of people are not. Like, it's just too uncomfortable for me to go to the pride parade, right? Or it's too uncomfortable for me to go to a Black community. It's just being aware that that's an area of discomfort, but important to be able to step through and learn how to get comfortable. That's
Mhm.
how we grow.
Mhm.
So those social connections and learning how to socialize, and then also the final I would say is your relationship, the relational, and that's the empathy side of it. So are we really finding ways to empathize? So, for example, if you're doing a performance review and it's a hard review, are you giving time to step back and saying, I know this is hard. Here's what my being really curious on their feedback and then being really clear. One of the things that I see often as I work with a lot of women's leadership is you're not getting constructive feedback because they're avoiding the conversation. And so that's emotional intelligence, right? Like I too uncomfortable because I'm not comfortable in being in a one-on-one with a woman or somebody on my team. And so I just don't give the feedback or don't give enough feedback and it limits their growth within the team.
Yeah, yeah, that's very important. The idea. Brown's "Clarity is kindness," right? Always
Hmm.
comes to mind.
Yeah.
You know, um, Providing adequate context,
Hmm.
so that people understand and know their blind spots, but doing that in an empathetic,
Right.
manner, right?
Right.
And know what expectations are, what the targets are, where we all
Yeah.
should focus. So there's some really good, thoughts here, and I really like, for example, power of the pause.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that I've definitely made progress on, as a leader. Even Just hearing people out and having no reaction or answer to it, but simply to say, you know what, I hear what you've said. I
Yeah.
appreciate you expressing,
Yeah.
all this information, your concerns. I've taken detailed notes.
Yeah.
Um, Give me some time to
Yes.
to to think about all this. Give me some time to work with the teams around it,
Yeah.
to get some more thoughts, right? And I'll get back to you.
Yes.
Um,
You don't have to always respond right in the moment.
yeah,
And sometimes we feel like we need to do that and it can create more of a divide rather than saying,
yeah,
I hear what you said. This is what I understand. Let me go take some time. I will be back to you. So at least they know you've they've been heard.
yeah,
Right. That's really important to
yeah,
repeat back and say, I hear you. This is what I understand. Are we aligned? Okay, let me now take some time in it.
yeah. First steps at closing the gap,
Yeah.
right, is
Yeah.
making sure that you understand, right,
Yeah.
what they're expressing, and that they agree that that's
Yeah.
where you're at. Yeah. So uh, let's talk a little bit then about, to kind of wrap up here. And Mal, if there are any questions we should get to here
Yeah.
towards the end of the hour, we can do that here. But I want to talk quickly about, you mentioned the added complexity of remote teams, right?
Yeah.
When you're no longer, in the same office, you no
Yeah.
longer have the ability to have water cooler chat, to build
Mhm.
interpersonal
Mhm.
relationships, right? On topics outside of business, right?
Yeah.
To see each other face to face. There is, in my opinion, and I am a person who values relationships, deeply.
Yeah.
I'm a people person. So, in my opinion, it is significantly more challenging in a remote context to create relationships of trust, right?
Yes.
Um, Give us some pointers on that. What are some of the things that that you have found effective in those environments?
Yeah, so for years I managed a global team and I found it was really challenging both from a cultural perspective as well as time zone and remote working, right? So I had teams in Germany, Ireland, and then China. And I I remember a moment for me. I'm just going to share my own experience here where I would be I'm a very direct person. Some people like that, some people don't, but I am. And so I like to, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what we're going to get done, we're moving forward. And I started to realize that my team in China just never spoke up. And I was like, "Oh, wait. Maybe I need to have a conversation here. Like, am I being too brusque? Is it?" But I realized they were saying that I needed to invite them to speak. And so a couple of things that I had to do is we scheduled one-on-ones. I never did. This is before virtual work became the thing. But we would always require video. Now that's normal. Back then it was not.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
really being able to see them, be able to read their body language, be able to see how they're reacting was really important to me. A lot of times in meetings, requiring people are on so I can watch, like, because I still look for body language.
Sure.
And so really being able to see how they're responding, are they engaged, just really helps make sure that I'm responding the right way as well. Leaving pauses within your meetings and time for people to provide their feedback. Doing those round robins at the end, saying, okay, did everybody get to be able to present their ideas within a session so they feel like they're heard and engaged? Those are all ways of making sure that everybody stays involved and engaged and isn't getting looked over, because it is still an opportunity to miss out on something that needs to be said or heard or talked through, right? So you have to create space for those. One other thing that thought was really great as kind of remote work started coming up was really engaging your teams in a centralized purpose. And what I mean by that is really picking up and saying, "Okay, within our team, we want to pick up a cause or get involved in the community somehow, or we want to get, what resonates for everyone and allow the team to say, here's something that's meaningful for me or for us, and we want to get involved." What starts happening is they start engaging on a different level than just work. Um, so really getting involved, feeling like they're more tied to your company, more tied to your purpose, that they're finding purpose through their company and their work, also is a great way of pulling people in and getting them engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. And we have at Nexus IT, we have what we call our community action committee,
Mhm.
and that committee every quarter, selects a nonprofit that will serve, and we'll figure out ways to do that. Right?
Yeah.
Could be service projects, could be donations, could be supporting their events or initiatives, whatever it might be. Right? But um, so you mentioned particularly this idea of the nuances of cross-border cultural
Yeah.
differences, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the crazy thing is that it's not just across country lines, right?
No.
It's cities here in the U.S.,
Oh,
right?
it's cities
And-
from Ogden to Utah County.
Yeah,
Like even running tech moms, I see cultural differences all the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And evolving, your understanding as a leader of what that culture looks like, and
Yeah.
it's so interesting. You mentioned your Chinese teammates who wouldn't provide any feedback until invited, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a cultural difference,
Yeah.
right? So those tiny little things, right, that you have to
Yeah.
um, focus in on,
Yeah.
understand, and then intentionally make movements in order to
Yeah.
solve for those problems, right?
And get them engaged and appreciate. I think cultural appreciation, I like that term. I had a lot of my team was from India, and just being curious about their holidays, curious about their traditions, curious. I would ask questions all the time, and I learned so much. And eventually, we'd been running like Diwali celebrations at San Jose for years, but we had never done it in Salt Lake City. And I was like, why are we not running Diwali here?
Yeah,
And so I had one of my team pick up and launch a big party. We, celebrated. I had one of my team actually bring me back Indian dress for to wear, and it was really fun, and just got involved and got to celebrate in a different way that I just never knew myself. And you grow through all of those experiences and
yeah,
just being open to it, right?
yeah.
So,
For me, that stuff's fantastic too. I mean,
yeah.
I love. I mean, I'm a wanderer, right? I'm an adventurer. I love experiencing the world's cultures, right, and
Yeah.
the people and gastronomy and different places. And so, firsthand experiencing particularly cultural celebrations, right? It's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, Trina, we are at the top of the hour here. Before we wrap, any just final word of wisdom that you want to share with the audience?
Oh, just lean in. I mean, there's just I think the one thing that I've seen is just get past the discomfort, because then it gets comfortable and it's not that big a thing, saying, okay, we can be emotional and human, and it's okay. And appreciating other people's life experiences through that.
Yeah. Cool. Good advice. Good advice. Trina, thank you so much for, being my guest here again on TechBeat.
Absolutely.
I always learn so much from you. I'm always very inspired by you and the things that you're doing, the way that you're engaging, the impact that you're creating. Thank you for being who you are.
You're
It's
welcome.
cool, and I appreciate you being my friend. And being my guest, and thank you for all of our guests who joined us this hour. Thanks for all the cool comments and everything. We appreciate everybody who's joined us. We're going to go ahead and sign off and wish you all a wonderful day. We'll see ya.